Hello and welcome back. This is ProTaleDev back with another Dungeon Architect video. Just a disclaimer: I've been sick for the last two weeks, so I've unfortunately not been able to upload and not been able to record. Essentially, a lot of this stuff was worked on quite a long time ago, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. Some of it, so it's been quite a while since I've recorded. So just keep that in mind. Let's just get straight into it. So we're going to press play here. This is just the standard world, and what you're going to see immediately is this UI. So this is part of a new UI that's going to that I'm showing, which is the Adventurer Guild. It's going to have a bunch of information. It's right next to our character selection right here, which has also had some minor changes here and there, just visually to look a little bit better. But essentially, it's right next to it. It looks like a dock. When you click on it, you'll bring up the guild UI, which is just a bunch of new information. Essentially, starting from the far right, we've got stats for the island manager and the dungeon manager. This isn't going to be available for the tutorial islands. In fact, a lot of this information isn't going to be available, so expansions you won't be able to do. The stats and the expeditions won't be available either. The island manager at the top here is going to be sort of a quick way to close and open the island in case maybe you're losing too much money, if there's a disaster maybe that you have to manually close. Essentially, this option is going to be there for you. Then we have the dungeon expeditions, which are the brand new journeying into dungeons experience. Essentially, you'll be able to a random expedition will be created right here, and you'll be able to go into a dungeon that's randomized based on this information. What I'm going to quickly do is make this into the maximized screen so that you can see it a little bit better. But essentially, this expedition has 3 different types that you can have. You can have a lush grotto, old ruins, and the last one, which is the volcanic hollow. These are essentially 3 different biome types, 3 different themes that are going to spawn randomly, and you can see a bunch of information that's here as well. So if we go on this one, which is lush grotto, we also have easy difficulty, the size of it, which is small. It's going to last 4 days until it becomes no longer available, and then we have the potential disasters right here, which hasn't been put in yet. You can see this one down here, which has, and then you'll have a little bit of a description here and an icon that is associated with it. This is all basically determined by a dungeon ID that is created randomly. Now, in the last video, I mentioned that I was going to put all of our new dungeon stuff in a new scene. And essentially I've done that. I've just named the scene level 1.5, could be renamed another time, but essentially I take all the information that is here, and then when you enter the dungeon it transfers that ID that I've created, it passes it over into that scene, and then the dungeon is generated based on that ID. You also won't be able to actually enter the dungeon until you've selected your character inventory, so if you haven't equipped everything, you won't actually be able to enter. And so it's really important to be able to craft this stuff. So if I quickly go into here and try and enter the dungeon, nothing will happen. At the moment it's made so that you have to have everything, but the chances are I'm going to make it so that you only have to equip 1 weapon. Now that's just a quick view of what this guild, Adventurer Guild UI is, and like kind of what to expect from it. So this script has been significantly changed, the dungeon manager. It did have a lot more code, it was very different. Now it's essentially all it's doing is it's just generating a code, then passing some information, some strings into our specific text values so that it can give the correct information on our dungeon, and then it passes that information into our ID. So if you see, for example, right here we got our random difficulty number, which is 1 to 3. Essentially, it'll choose one of those numbers, and that'll be completely randomized. All of our information from difficulty, theme, size, region, and boss is randomized, and this determines a lot of things in the dungeon. That information is then printed as a, or it should say the text file is then changed depending on what the number was. So depending on what theme it was, will determine this text right here. Then what we have here is the number gets printed, the random number that was chosen. It's printed into this number right here, which is just another value that's holding that information, and placed into a string. This string is then represented as the ID, which we can then pass into our dungeon and help us generate that dungeon based on that ID. So once it's, we do also print it off with debug.log, just so we can see it in our console what the code is, and then what we can, what happens is this then plays. So if the button is then clicked to enter the dungeon, it will then check to see if our equipment is selected, make sure that it's not set at 0, and then it'll pass all the information to our static scripts, which can pass information from one scene to another. Of course, it doesn't save it, it just passes it on. As long as essentially, if the game was closed, you would lose that information. But that's not important for what this is. So you can see we've got a script here which is a static player controller, and we also have a static dungeon controller. The dungeon controller determines how the dungeon is generated, the information that the dungeon generation needs, and then the static player controller passes in exactly what the player has equipped. So whether how many items, how many specific number of resources that the potions are, the weapons, anything like that, any information the player needs in the dungeon is passed straight through here. And as you can see, it's quite a lot of stuff that had to have been passed to the player. Once that's happened, then we actually load the level. Now if you look at our static values within our state script, which is our dungeon controller, which is passing the ID, it's very simple, very straightforward. It just gets updated before it loads the next scene. And then what happens here is we have our dungeon controller script, which has all the information necessary to load the individual prefabs at a specific point, and it determines what point is what based on what is selected. So if the difficulty is 1, or if the theme is 1, you know, if it's a small size or a large size, you know, and then also what kind of region type it is. Of course, we have the generation here, which is the information passed through here, and determining what the string size is and what position the element of the string is, determines what we got in this string, individual strings right here. It updates these, and then we pass these into numbers, and then the numbers obviously determine all of this. Now we do the exact same thing as I mentioned with the player equipment. Player equipment is selected right here, so if we go with a few different things right there, and then we pass in some of these weapons, now we can enter a dungeon. So now if we enter this dungeon, it should allow us, it'll also generate a code. So now you'll see at the bottom left what we've got here is a code. So this code is essentially, if I bring this up here, this code is essentially what our dungeon is. So if I click on this, it'll generate a dungeon based on this ID. Now for the sake of the video, because a lot of the dungeon isn't done, like I said, I've not been able to work on it. What I can show right here is I can actually edit this code. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. I can edit this code manually, and we're just going to make it a volcanic region. We're going to change the regions to 5 so we get access to all of the regions that are available, because there are multiple different types of regions that I'll show in a minute. And what we can do is just carry on. And you can see now we've got a dungeon that has been created. We're now in the new scene, and we have a bunch of monsters spawning that are specifically only spawning for this type of dungeon. Now of course we can scroll through our items, and we should have them in our hand. You can actually see the potions. Whoops, didn't mean to jump off. Quickly run over here a second, just to give me a bit of time. And you can see that we have got our weapons equipped. Now they're a little bit small, so I might actually increase the size of the weapons because they are very small. But they do actually in fact work. Of course we've got a few glitches here where the player falls through the world a little bit. That's something that will be fixed. Let's actually take a potion just so I can heal. So yeah, there's still a lot that needs to be done, but the generation is done essentially. And quickly have a look at the environment. You'll see a couple of different sections that are created right here. So this is just the small region at the moment, and you'll see these different regions that we got right here. So if I quickly scroll down here, you'll see that we got a volcanic region, Spire 1. Spire 1 is these crystal spires right here. We have the jagged one, which are these sort of broken up masses right here, which are a little bit exposed to the lava a lot more. However, they're still easily navigatable. Then we have the islands, which are the most dangerous, which are these smaller connected ones, much closer to the lava as well. Less places to jump up and be able to clear these areas, so much more dangerous. And then we have the plain one. Plane 1 is, or the plains type, is just essentially a huge land mass. It's the easiest to navigate, and it's also the easiest to fight on. These types, and then we have the final type is obviously something that's spawned in with all of them, which is why I clicked 5 for the region type, it's because it has access to all of them at random. You'll also see that we did have a lift or an elevator that's come down, and it essentially lowers you down into the dungeon that I've done. You can jump off early, but I am going to add in fall damage at some point. But essentially this is just to sort of load you in and let the monsters load in and anything else load in, just to give the game a bit of time. And also to give you an idea of kind of what the dungeon looks like very quickly, without like throwing yourself straight into it. Again, this is just the small size, and this is the type of volcanic region that I was going for. If I quickly come out of here and go into our prefabs, you'll see that we got our ruined region, our volcanic region, and then there's the lush region, which I haven't done anything for yet. The volcanic region is the one I've done the most of, but we have done some of the ruins region. So if I quickly show off some of what it looks like, essentially it's like our dungeon builds before. I've just kind of remodeled it based off that, but it's a lot more detailed. We have these brick textures and materials that have now been added on, which make it look a lot better. We also have some of these rooms that have been look quite nice. And it's going to be really nice to explore. It's going to have a completely different feel to what we had previously with the dungeons, and with this nice glowing effect from candles and the nice effect from all of the different things inside. And they're going to have their own types as well, from corridors, hallway types to I believe we have these small rooms, and we're going to have a couple more types as well in there mixed. We do also have these bigger sizes, so right here we have medium, which has been completed, which is much larger areas. So these areas are going to be a lot more easier to navigate, but they're going to have a lot more monsters spawn on them, from the jagged to the island, and the island again going to be more exposed, plains, and then the spires right there. Of course, these small ones, like this is an example of the island for the small, much less to run on. Oh, you'll also see that we got an environment right here as well, all of like cave system. If I turn the lighting off, you'll see the caving system a little bit better. I'm probably going to alter this a little bit as well, because it's a little bit too close and I want a little bit more to it. But essentially we do have a little bit of an environment. Now getting back to the player that I mentioned, we have the player camera, which is actually not on the player. We actually have a follow script set up, which I've done in previous games. This allows me to keep the player, this allows for the camera to carry on following the player without actually rotating the camera, which I didn't want for this game. I want it to be very stationary. And then inside of our player, we also have all of our different new weapons all set up now, including the durability and how things work. But we have the animations like I just mentioned. So this looks very similar to the animation previously that I've done for him. However, there is some big differences. So this is still the same. We can still go from any state into our swings and things like that. However, now what we have instead is when going to our idle, we actually have right here our player walk and run. Instead of managing it, going around and making a big spider web, essentially what I'm going to be using is blend trees to blend animations together. Now, essentially this just goes into here based on the velocity of the player. If it's greater than 0, then it means we're moving. That's controlled in a script, which I'll show in a minute. And then if we go into our blend tree right here, which I've named just player walk and run, we can now blend these two together. Now what I'm going to do for the sake of the video is I've just placed a block here just for testing, just to kind of show what we got over here, what's going on down at our blend tree when we're actually moving. So as you can see, it goes up when we're moving forward, which is our slow walk, but it doesn't go any further than 0.49 to the power of 9 or whatever. It goes to about 5 or just under 5, 0.5, and this is just our standard walk animation. However, if we press shift, you'll see that it goes all the way to 1, and now we're moving much quicker. Essentially, it's now blending these together. If I let go, but carry on pressing the WASD, it'll still go back to 0.5, and if we let go completely, it goes straight back to 0 where it doesn't move. Now we are going to increase the speed of this at some point so that the movement is much quicker, but essentially the animation is working for the movement, as you can see right here. Now, a lot of the animations for the weapons and stuff don't really work. As you saw, their arms kind of go into an idle T-pose, and that's because they're not blending together right now. They're not done, so just keep that in mind. Another thing to mention is that monsters are not going to have health bars above them. They're kind of just going to be around. I feel like it breaks the immersion just having health bars above them, especially when you're looking down on top of them. And so I don't really like the idea of the health bars and the information. It's just too much for the player to be aware of when they're trying to fight. It just really gets in the way. And so what I've decided is that the monsters are now just going to not have any health bar. When you hit them, they'll maybe like flash red or something like that. There'll be an effect, and then when they die, they die. The very last thing to mention is that nighttime is now much quicker. The reason is because nighttime is just very boring. It's hard to see anything, and people just want to get the night over in most games. And so what I've done is I've made it so that the nighttime is just much faster. Now I do believe that is everything that I need to talk about. Most stuff in this game is now starting to look a lot better. With like the new textures and things, I'm getting very happy with how we are. I just wish we were getting through it a little bit quicker, but I couldn't help being ill for these last 2 weeks. I was hoping that these dungeons would essentially be done by now. And while they are getting there, hopefully I can carry on now, now that I'm feeling a lot better. But hopefully by the time we show the next video, hopefully the Lush dungeon and the final dungeon, the old ruins, which I'm currently working on now, hopefully they are finished. I won't be showing any of the overworld, I won't be showing anything else. I'll just be showing the new dungeon looks and probably the monsters that are now spawning in there. Okay, so this is ProTaleDev, and I'll see you next time.